The fire crackles and spits, children, like the anger in a guilty heart. In our last telling, Amina danced in the village square, and with each step, a lie crumbled. A secret crawled into the light. The chief's men have confessed, his advisor is exposed, and the chief himself stands alone, his voice a hollow sound. But the dance is not over. The ancestors are not yet satisfied. For the deepest truths, the ones buried by generations, are yet to be uncovered. Let us return to the square and witness the final, most powerful movements of the noble dancer. The air in the village square was thick with the weight of exposed truths. Whispers and sobs filled the space where jeers had once lived. People clutched their newly revealed secrets, a stolen necklace, a broken promise, a lie told long ago, as if they were hot coals. The circle of onlookers, once a hostile mob, was now a gathering of the accused, each person feeling the uncomfortable sting of the dancer's truth. Yet, their attention was not on their own shame, but on the figure at the center, and the man she was now approaching. Amina's dance slowed, becoming more deliberate. Her feet, bare and dusty, carried her towards the chief's veranda. The crowd parted before her like water before a prow. She did not look at Chief David with hatred, but with a sorrowful focus that was far more terrifying. Her hands, which had called forth the petty thefts and betrayals of the villagers, now began to move in a different rhythm, the rhythm of the grandmothers. It was a slow, heavy rhythm, like the pounding of a funeral drum. The ancestors teach, the lies of a chief are not small stones, but boulders that crush many. Amina's dance was now reaching for those boulders. As Amina's hands wove the rhythm of the grandmothers, the air around Chief David began to shimmer, just as it had beneath the fig tree. The villagers gasped and stumbled backward. Forms were taking shape, misty, translucent figures, their faces etched with sorrow and accusation. They were not the powerful, benevolent ancestors who had taught Amina. These were the spirits of those who had been wronged, those whose names the chief and his predecessors had tried to bury. They were the faces of the trampled. An old woman, her spirit form bent and weary, pointed a trembling finger at the spot where the chief's granary now stood. "My yams," her voice whispered on the wind, a sound that chilled the blood. "You burned my hut for my land." A young man, his spirit bearing the wounds of a violent death, stood near the chief's well. "My father's land," he murmured. "You took it, and you silenced him." One by one, they appeared, the forgotten, the dispossessed, the victims of the chief's family for generations. The chief stared, his face a mask of terror. He could not command these subjects. He could not banish these ghosts. They were the living memory of his house's sins. Chief David tried to speak, to command, to deny, but his voice was gone. It was as if the apparitions had stolen it. He stumbled back from the edge of the veranda, colliding with the wooden post. The fine leopard skin cloth he wore seemed to hang on him like a sack, no longer a symbol of power, but a costume of a pretender. He looked at his hands, the hands that had signed the orders, that had accepted the bribes, that had pointed the finger at an innocent dancer. They were just hands, old and trembling. He looked out at his people, and for the first time, he saw himself reflected in their eyes, not as a great chief, but as a small, cruel man. The mask of authority, the mask of righteousness he had worn for so long, was gone, stripped away by a dance. He had no mask left to hide behind. The nakedness of his soul was on display for the entire village, and the weight of it was crushing. He sank to his knees on the veranda, a broken figure, the ghosts of his victims circling him in silent judgment. When a chief's mask falls, the people see not a man, but the hole where his heart should be. But the ancestors were not done. As the chief knelt, the misty figures began to drift among the living villagers. They did not accuse the living, they touched them gently, and as they did, memories stirred. An old man remembered his grandfather speaking of a cousin who had simply vanished, his land absorbed by the chief's compound. A woman recalled her grandmother's whispered stories of a fire that had been no accident. The truths the ancestors revealed were not just the chief's lies, but the village's own forgetting. They had allowed the chief's family to rewrite history, to bury its crimes, because it was easier than fighting. Tears flowed freely now, not just of shame, but of grief. Grief for the ancestors whose stories had been silenced, for the injustices that had been accepted as the way of things. Amina continued to dance, her movements now a slow, gentle weaving, as if she was trying to stitch the torn fabric of the village's memory back together. The dance was no longer revealing, it was connecting. It was reminding the living that they were part of a long chain, and that the broken links of the past weakened the whole. The lesson was a hard one. A village that forgets its dead invites the ghosts to haunt the living. As the sun began its slow descent, casting long, golden shadows across the square, Amina's dance changed once more. The sharp, revealing movements softened. The accusing gestures became open hands. She was moving into the final part of the dance, the part the first mother had spoken of, the weaving of remedy. The ancestors had not come to gloat or to destroy. They had come to see balance restored. Amina stopped in the center of the square, facing the kneeling chief and the weeping villagers. She raised her arms, not in accusation, but in a gesture that encompassed them all, the guilty and the wronged, the living and the dead. Her voice, when it came, was not her own. It was a chorus of voices, the voices of the ancestors speaking through her. The truth is known, the voices said, resonating in the very bones of those who heard. The wounds are open. Now, the healing must begin. Revenge that tears the world further apart is not the way of the elders. The true justice we favor is the kind that stitches wounds, draws confession, and restores the household of the living and the dead. Amina's own voice returned, but it was filled with a new strength, a calm authority born of her journey. She looked at Chief David, who still knelt, broken. She did not feel triumph, only a profound weariness. "Chief," she said, her voice clear in the silent square. "The ancestors do not rejoice in broken bodies. They ask for righted balances. The first step is this: return the stolen granaries. Every bag of millet, every yam, every measure of grain your family has taken unjustly must be given back to those from whom it was stolen, or to their descendants." A murmur ran through the crowd. The chief's granaries were vast, the stuff of legend. To empty them would be to strip him of his wealth, the very foundation of his power. He looked up, his eyes pleading, but Amina's gaze was steady, holding the light of the ancestors. An old woman, the descendant of the family whose land the chief's compound was built on, stepped forward, her eyes wet with tears. "The yams from my grandmother's fields," she whispered. "We will have them back." It was the first thread of a new justice being woven. Amina did not wait for the chief's agreement. The dance continued, guiding her words. "Second," she proclaimed, turning to the village, her eyes scanning the huts that had been left empty, the families that had been scattered. "Rebuild the houses you ruined. For every hut your men have burned, for every family you have driven out, you will provide the labor and the materials to build them anew, stronger than before. The men who did your bidding will help, for their hands were the instruments of your will." She looked at Kwame and the other guards, who still sat in the dust, their heads bowed. They nodded, unable to meet anyone's eyes. This was a deeper justice. It was not just about returning goods, but about restoring homes, about physically rebuilding what had been destroyed. It was a public, ongoing act of repentance that would take months, maybe years. It would be a constant reminder of the cost of the chief's pride and cruelty. A house rebuilt by the hands that tore it down stands as a monument to a lesson learned. The ancestors whispered through the rustling leaves of the baobab. The village understood. This was not punishment for its own sake. It was a path to healing for everyone. Amina's dance led her to the edge of the square, where the land was bare and eroded, a result of years of neglect and greed. "Third," she said, her voice carrying the weight of the ages. "Plant trees where you cut them down. The grove beyond the river, felled for the chief's new compound, must be renewed. You will plant a tree for every one you took, and you will tend them until they are tall. This is for the children and for their children. It is a debt you owe not just to the living, but to the earth itself and all who will come after." This was a justice that looked forward, not just backward. It was about restoring the balance with nature, about ensuring that the village's future would be shaded by the wisdom of this lesson. The chief, who had never planted a thing in his life, who only took, was being asked to give back to the very soil that sustained them. It was a profound humiliation, but also a profound opportunity for change. He would learn the patience of a tree, the slow work of nurturing life, a stark contrast to the quick, destructive actions of his past. Finally, Amina's dance brought her back to the center of the square, where the misty ancestors still hovered, watching. She looked at the chief, then at the village elders, who sat in a shocked, silent row. "Fourth," she said, her voice dropping low, but carrying to every ear. "Honor the names you buried, the ancestors whose stories were silenced, whose graves were forgotten, must be remembered. A shrine will be built, a place of remembrance for all the families who were wronged. Their names will be spoken at every festival, their stories taught to every child. They will no longer be ghosts, they will be ancestors at peace." This was the most important demand of all. It was the spiritual restoration. The chief's greatest sin was not just theft or cruelty, but the attempt to erase people from memory, to cut them off from the chain of life. To restore the ancestors to their rightful place in the village's heart was to heal the deepest wound. The misty figures stirred, their sorrowful faces softening. This was what they had waited for, not revenge, but remembrance. To be seen, to be heard, to be honored once more by their descendants. The air grew lighter, warmer. Amina lowered her arms. The dance was finished. The truth was told. The demands were made. She turned to the crowd, her eyes seeking out those who had been wronged. The old woman who had lost her granary, the family whose hut had been burned, the descendants of the silenced. "These are the measures the ancestors asked for," she said, "but I am only their messenger. It is not for me, nor for the chief, to decide the final shape of justice. Those who have been wronged will choose the measure. They will decide what is enough, what is fair." She looked at the old woman. "The return of the Ams. Is that sufficient?" The old woman, tears streaming down her face, nodded, clutching her hands to her heart. She looked at a young man whose father had been driven out. "A new house. Is that enough?" He swallowed, his own eyes wet, and nodded. One by one, the victims were given voice, given power. They were no longer passive recipients of justice or injustice. They were its architects. The chief watched, realizing the final bitter truth. His fate was no longer in his own hands, nor even in Amina's, but in the hands of those he had harmed. True justice is not a stone dropped from above, but a calabash passed around the circle, filled by all. With the victim's consent, the village elders finally stirred from their shocked silence. The eldest among them, a woman named Nana Acua, whose hair was white as cotton, rose slowly to her feet. She had been a friend to Amina's grandmother. Her voice, though thin with age, carried the authority of a lifetime. "Chief David," she said, her gaze unwavering, "you have heard the truth spoken by the ancestors and the demands of those you have wronged. These are not punishments we set upon you. They are the first steps on a path you must walk." She paused, letting her words sink in. "But the path begins with a clearing of the way. You cannot lead while carrying the weight of these crimes. You are stripped of your title, of your stool, until you have learned to listen. Until the last house is rebuilt, until the last tree is planted, until the names of the ancestors are spoken from the new shrine. You are no longer chief. You are simply David, a man with much work to do." The chief, no David, bowed his head. The leopard skin cloth seemed to slip from his shoulders. The weight of the elder's judgment, far heavier than any chain, settled upon him. As David sat in the dust, stripped of his power, Jacob, his advisor, tried to make himself as small as possible, hoping to be forgotten. But Amina's eyes found him. She did not need to dance. The truth of his nature was now plain for all to see. "Jacob," she said, and her voice was cold, not with anger, but with a finality that was worse. "You fed the chief's jealousy with your poisonous words. You plotted and lied for your own gain. The village has no place for such a snake." The elders conferred briefly. Their judgment was swift. Jacob was banished, not with violence, but with a contempt that cut deeper than any wound. He was to leave Takumi by nightfall, and if he was ever seen again, the young men would be sent to drive him out like the wild dog he was. He scurried away, his fine clothes now the garb of an outcast, a lesson to all that the whisperer of lies will eventually be choked by his own tongue. As he fled, a young woman from the crowd, her face streaked with tears, approached Amina. In her hands, she held something wrapped in clean cloth. It was the grandmother's mask. I found it, she whispered. Jacob threw it away. I kept it safe, hoping. Amina took the mask, her hands trembling. She held it to her heart, feeling the familiar wood, the spirit of her grandmother, finally home. In the days that followed, a profound change swept through Takumi. The square, once a place of judgment, became a place of assembly. The women of the village, who had always measured fairness in the distribution of food, the settling of disputes, the raising of children, were called upon. Amina, guided by the whispers of the ancestors, sat with them. They wrote new laws, not on parchment, but in the hearts of the people. Laws that no chief could take land without the consent of the Council of Elders, which would now always include women. Laws that ensured the voices of the vulnerable would be heard. Laws that honored the ancestors with a festival of remembrance every year. It was a slow, painstaking process. There were arguments, disagreements, old grudges that resurfaced. But the memory of Amina's dance, of the ancestors standing in the square, was a powerful guide. They were not building a perfect village, but a more just one. They were weaving a new fabric from the torn threads of the old. The ancestors teach, a law written by many hands is harder to break than a stone. The women wrote, and the men listened, and the children watched, learning that justice was not a decree from on high, but a conversation, a balance constantly being sought. Amina did not stay in the village square. When the council meetings ended and the new laws were inscribed, she went to her family's hut. Her parents, Kofi and Grace, were waiting. The reunion was not loud or dramatic. They simply held each other, the tears flowing freely, washing away the months of pain and separation. Kofi's hands, which had been silent for so long, found their way to his gem. He began to play a soft, gentle rhythm, the rhythm of homecoming. Amina smiled, a real smile, the first in a long time. She took her grandmother's mask and placed it carefully on its shelf. She touched the glowing shells the ancestors had given her, now hanging beside it. For a moment, she felt the presence of the first mother, a warm, approving presence. She had done what was asked. She had danced the truth, and she had helped the village find a path to healing. But the dancer was tired. The weight of carrying the ancestors, of being their voice, was immense. She sat by the fire with her parents, listening to her father's drum, and for that one quiet hour, she was simply their daughter again. The village could wait. The ancestors understood. Even the river must rest in its deepest pools, her mother whispered, stroking her hair. Weeks passed. The work of restitution began. David, the former chief, could be seen carrying stones for the new houses, his fine robes replaced with a simple laborer's cloth. His hands, once soft, grew calloused. He did not speak much, but he worked. The planting of the new grove began, a line of tiny saplings reaching for the sun. And in the center of the village, a simple but beautiful shrine was built, its walls adorned with the names of the forgotten ancestors, carved by the hands of their descendants. At night, when the village slept, a new sound could be heard. It was not the wind, nor the river. It was a low, contented hum, seeming to come from the very roots of the great baobab, from the earth itself. It was the ancestors, no longer restless, no longer weeping. They were satisfied. The balance was being restored. The household of the living and the dead was being mended, stitch by stitch. Amina would often walk to the baobab at dusk and press her ear to its massive trunk, listening to that hum. It was a song of peace, a song of home. It was the ancestors telling her she had done well. The tale of the dancer was far from over, but for now, there was peace. Peace has returned to Takumi, children. The chief is humbled, the ancestors are honored, and the village learns to walk a new path. But a story does not end when the conflict is resolved. It continues in the quiet moments, in the new challenges, in the legacy passed from one generation to the next. What will become of Amina? Will the village hold to its new laws? And what of the children who once threw stones? Their story is just beginning. The final episode awaits, where we will see the fruits of the seeds planted by the noble dancer. Rest your heads and return for the closing of our tale.